Russian army has been rebellion. Even air travel is out of the question for. As a result of the riots, thousands of soldiers in the Russian army rebelled against their superiors. This movement, which caused Putin to become very concerned, fundamentally altered the path that the war would take during the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Significant issues have been surfacing in the Russian army for some time. The actions taken by soldiers who do not wish to engage in combat constitute one of these issues. The entire world was taken aback by the final act, committed by the rebel soldiers serving in the Russian army, due to the fact that Ukraine is winning the war, and that nearly 1,000 Russian soldiers are killed every day. The uprising within the army is becoming more and more widespread. Putin has made numerous attempts to thwart them, but none of them have been success. A good number of the topics that have been discussed in recent meetings shed light on the challenges that are currently being faced by the Russian armed forces. At the very beginning of the war, Russian commanders and bureaucrats in Russia predicted that Ukraine would give up without putting up a fight and then surrender everything. However, became very unclear after Zelensky stated that he would not surrender any land without a fight. As a response, Russia announced that it would occupy Ukraine within the next 4 days after it made the decision to invade. Putin, however, was unsuccessful in every endeavor. After fighting for almost a full year, approximately 150,000 Russian soldiers were killed in action. The Russian soldiers' morale suffered as a direct result of these casualties. Those Russian soldiers who were unwilling to engage in combat immediately began exploring a variety of escape options from the front lines. At the beginning of these attempts, there is a significant increase in the number of soldiers who surrendered directly to the Ukrainian government. But the real trouble for the Russian army began when the Ukrainian government took their most recent. The fact that Russia did not have a complete understanding of the geography of Ukraine and that it attempted an invasion without first gathering the necessary intelligence created a significant problem all on its own. However, as a result of the invading army's meticulous planning and precise assessments, Russia was unable to mount a successful defense against the oncoming threat. Why did Legrain avoid the hot battles and the ammunition depots that were under? The vast majority of its attacks were directed at convoys, transporting communication. Because the Russian army lacked sufficient ammunition, supplies, or equipment, they began the majority of the battles on the front line already defeated. This was due to a succession of astute moves made by the Ukrainian army. This dealt a substantial blow to the resistance offered by Russia on the front. Their intellectual superiority was adversely affected as a direct result of this. But in response to the most recent actions taken by Ukraine, Russian soldiers have begun to mutiny one after the other. As a result of the recently enacted mobilization law, Russian President Vladimir Putin's actions has initiated the rollout of a new mobilization that goes by the name MEGA. The Russian youth who are being conscripted into the armed forces are aware of this fact, despite the fact that this is a step that Russia is taking to compensate for its military losses. As a result, the Russian army, which had already suffered a psychological defeat, was incapable of making a comeback. As the Russian army that had invaded Ukraine continued to make moves against the Russian invaders, the Russians began to rebel against their own. What exactly did the Ukrainian army do to provoke a rebellion on the part of the Russians at the Dnieper River where they were completely halted? In their advance, the Russian army made the decision to retreat and take up a defensive position. According to some estimates, the Ukraine used Bayraktars just like it had in its previous operate. These drones are constantly searching for the coordinates of Russian ammunition, deposed and engaging in combat with them once they are located. The situation for the Russian army has begun to deteriorate as a direct result of this. Russian soldiers who were unable to take it any longer took action in order to voice their concerns to their superiors. The behavior of the Russian commanders, on the other, was so irritating that the soldiers in the army began to rebel against them. In reaction to the current circumstances, approximately 2,500 soldiers participated in the uprising against the commander. The local law enforcement agencies immediately stepped in to intervene with the Russian army in response to the unexpectedly rebellious Russian soldier. The Russian soldiers were severely surprised by the unexpectedly rebellious local law enforcement agency. The issue of lack of cohesion within the army was once again brought to light by this. It was already common knowledge that a significant number of Russian soldiers serving in the occupying army disobey Putin's orders. These uprisings have demonstrated once more that the Russian military is currently coping with significant challenges. The issue is not only in this region, but also in the fact that many Russian soldiers are unable to fight as a result of the Ukrainian strikes, particularly on the supply routes for the invading Russian army. This is another source of the problem. The Russian soldiers are also having a very difficult time coping with the effects of the cold because they are starving. Due to the current circumstances, the army is completely unable to carry out an operation that is particularly effective, due to the fact that there is not a single commander who is in charge of giving orders to the Russian army. It is already common knowledge around the globe that the Russian military is experiencing significant difficulties, particularly in the area of management. The distinction has become so significant that Valery Ov, the Russian Chief of General Staff, who is also the commander of the Ukrainian front, is now the primary commander of the Russian. He is also in charge of the Ukrainian front. However, it is forbidden for him to plan and carry out an operation on his own. The orders come from Vladimir Putin himself, who is in charge of this commander. The fact that different subgroups within the army each have their own commanding officers is a significant source of conflict. These are the Afghan Ferguson, who founded Wagner and Cordero and serves as director of them. The commander of the Chechens. War analysts believe that the presence of a large number of different units in the army presents a significant organizational challenge. Putin has an immediate responsibility to take action in order to halt the escalation of these problems. The problems are not only found in the chain of command, but also in many other areas, which is causing great internal turmoil within the Russian. Allegedly, the Russians are engaging in very shady business dealings with Banner mercenaries and Chechens on the battlefield. The Wagner Group brings unthinkable abominations due to the fact that the majority of its members are prisoners serving as soldiers. The situation is having an effect on Russian youth, particularly on those who do not want to fight as a. Many of them are either fleeing back to Russia or surrendering to Ukraine. In the event that this crisis continues, Russia will be powerless to do anything about it because the fundamental components that constitute the Russian army today are formed by these units, and a commander who are supposed to take responsibility for this formation are constantly engaged in power struggles with each. Case in point, the recent comments made by Yevgeny Ferguson about Sergei Soga demonstrate once more how severe this military crisis currently. Ferguson stated that Sergei Su, the Russian Minister of Defense, was incapable of doing his job. As soon as this accusation was made, the Russian press started becoming seriously. This was due to the fact that it was common knowledge that no one could say such words to the Russian defense minister. However, it is not entirely clear why Putin allowed this to take place at this time. It has been common knowledge for some time that Ferguson had a desire to take Choigus in the government. The seat fight, on the other hand, does nothing but play into Ukraine's. The Chechens who are fighting on the front lines are creating an even bigger mess for themselves. Although Kadyrov, the leader of the Chechens, has been in power for a significant amount of time, he is not regarded as a well-liked figure by his people. The fact that Kadyrov has consistently supported Putin is the primary factor in this situation. It is believed that Vladimir Putin was responsible for the murder of Kadyrov in the early days of his Mad Kady the Holy Father. Almost immediately after these allegations, Kadyrov's policy of supporting Putin caused a significant rift within the Chechen population. The Sheikh Mansour Battalion, whose goal is to exact vengeance on Putin, is responsible for bringing about this division. The Sheikh Mansour Battalion does not consider Kady and other Prussian Chechens to be, even though they believe the Chechens' opportunity to exact revenge can come from the conflict between Ukraine and Russia on certain fronts. There is significant Chechen participation in the act of fighting during these wars. They inflict huge blows on the pro-Russian Chechens, especially after the recent entry of the Chechen commander Rustam Hazariyeva into the conflict, who participated in the war against Russia. The situation for the Ukrainian soldiers has improved significantly recently. It is believed that this played a relevant role in Chechens' desire for revenge. Because of this, Chechens fleeing the Russian front continued to make their way into Ukraine one by one. Putin was in a very difficult situation at this point. If Putin is unable to successfully break this impasse, then no one believes that he will be able to win. Israel has issued a challenge to Russia in the wake of its attack on Russia's Cham air base in Laya, which is located in Syria. Israel has begun an aerial assault on the territory in which Russian air bases are located in Tartus. According to reports from the Damascus regime, an undetermined number of missiles were fired at Tartus from the direction of the Mediterranean. After this, the official news agency of Syria, SINA, reported that the attack took place in the wee hours of the morning after this attack. Syria reported that 2 people had been injured as a result of the missiles that had been fired, as is their custom. The Israeli military decided not to issue a statement regarding this attack. It was shocking that this happened after Yair Lapid's decision to become interim prime. The Israeli jets hit Tars, which is considered to be the first attack to the interim premiership of Yair Lapid, who has decided to hold early elections on November 1st. It was shocking that this happened after Yair Lapid decided to become interim prime minister. So how was Russia unable to establish these air bases in Syria? Their response to Russia's ongoing invasion of Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, is currently as a response to the civil war that is taking place in Syria, where he has taken the side of Bashar al-Assad. He established a tortoise naval base on the coast of the Mediterranean. The agreement between Moscow and Damascus, which has been brought to light in the recent past, stipulates that Russian forces will have free use of the base in Tortoise for the next 49, and that Russian soldiers stationed at the base will not be prosecuted in Syrian courts. Additionally, the agreement states that Russian forces will not be held accountable for their actions in Syrian courts. Putin made the presentation regarding the expansion agreement for the Russian naval base in twos. So the dilemma of the Russian parliament and Russia continues to expand this naval base. An administrative authorization will be given to the Russian naval base to ensure that it is completely exempt from the civil war in Syria as part of the agreement. In addition to this, it is common knowledge that any and all goods stored by Russia at this rate will be exempt from inspection and acquisition. It is common knowledge that this decision can remain in effect for another 25 years, provided that no party objects to it during that. In addition to this, it is also stated that to ensure the safety of this installation, Russia is within its legal rights to deploy the necessary number of soldiers following these military actions taken against Russia. Israel issued a statement regarding its ideal military framework. The following is a statement. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, recently stated that his country is considering providing Ukraine with military assistance and that they are also taking action to prevent Iran from manufacturing weapons and other essential tools. An interview with Benjamin Netanyahu was conducted in the past by a van from the American television network, CNN. When asked about the possibility of deploying the Israeli Iron Dome air defense system to Ukraine in order to provide support, he responded by saying that he's evaluating this possibility. Netanyahu pointed out that some of the many ammunition stocks that Israel has on Israel were sent to Ukraine by the United States. Netanyahu has said, "I won't go into detail, but it is known that Israel will take action against Iran's production of the weapons that were used in Ukraine." Netanyahu did not confirm nor deny the allegations made against him. According to him, Israel was responsible for the drone attack that took place over the weekend on a munitions production facility in Isfahan, Iran. Any explosion that occurs in the Middle East immediately points the finger of blame. He said that there are times when it is us and other times when it is not us. The assistance that is being provided to Ukraine will continue indefinitely after Germany shipped 14 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine for the ongoing conflict in the past few days. The United States announced that it will send 31 and 1 Abrams tanks in the U.S. Army. These tanks are part of the U.S. Joe Biden, on the order of Vice President Joe Biden, will announce from the White House within the next few months that the M1 Abrams tanks will be of great benefit in the development of war strategy. This order came from President Joe Biden of the United States. The Ukrainian military will receive training on how to use these things, which have excellent maneuverability and open. It has been hypothesized that the training process for these things, which run on jet fuel, may be lengthy. Considering that this process will begin a few months after Biden's statement, it is possible that this will be the case. The shipping and training processes, which together take months, must be completed before M1 Abrams tanks can be seen operating in open. The primary battle tank utilized by the armored units of the United States Army is the M1 Abrams. General Creighton Abrams, who served as Commander-in-Chief of Staff of the 37th Armored Brigade, is honored with the naming of this facility. The thermal cameras and heavy armor on this tank give it the reputation of being difficult to neutralize, but it is also known for its ease in eliminating the threat posed by other. This beast, which has a range of 40 miles per hour, possesses a diesel engine with at least 15 horsepower, weighs close to 70 tons, and has the ability to fire 120mm tank cannons over a range that is effective while simultaneously attacking with all of its power. Following the provision of military assistance by the United States, inquiries were made regarding the shipment of F-16s to Ukraine. The response that Biden provided to this question was no. The statement made by Biden came one day after Germany announced that it would not be sending fighter jets to Ukraine. This is according to, in the ongoing conflict with Russia, fighter aircraft play a significant part in the United States' ability to maintain control of its airspace. Andriy Melnik, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, stated that he welcomed and tolerated this statement of ever. He requested that the nation that was on Ukraine's side form a coalition consisting of fighter jets and Sand Eurofighters, Tornadoes, French Rafales, and Swedish Gripen. Some EU countries, including the Netherlands, have told David that they appreciate his consideration of their request, but that he is unable to grant it at this time. Definitely the wrong answer. They were sent by my brother David. It was announced that Poland would be ready to participate in the delivery of fighter jets to Ukraine alongside NATO. Biden stated that if the United States were to participate in the country would experience economic difficulties and would face significant difficulties if its own ammunition were to run low. Zelensky expressed his gratitude to every nation that stood by him after the 8th and to all of the events that took place. After these statements, in which they requested assistance from the defense ministers of NATO countries, Zalesky also thanked the defense ministers of NATO. In preparation for this great war between Russia and Ukraine, a meeting was held in Brussels to supply Ukraine with equipment, weapons, and all of the ammunition that is required. After these discussions, an official with Western intelligence shared their assessment with the Financial Times, stating that Ukraine is facing a critical lack of both ammunition. In light of the pressure coming from Russia, he stressed how important it was that the aid supplies destined for Ukraine be sent there in a timely and accurate manner. As an illustration of this, it was reported that in response to the 5,000 artillery shells fired by Ukraine, Russia's response consisted of 20,000 artillery shells per day, which is 4 times more than Ukraine's total. It is very easy to see that Russia's arms industry is adequate in contrast to the Ukrainian military industry, which is having a lot of trouble. According to him, the need for a vast tornado is patently obvious, and Russia is in a position to take advantage of Ukraine's vulnerability to its own benefit. Over the past few days, Russia has given the order for warplanes to be sent to the border with Ukraine in preparation for the beginning of a new offensive. Experts in Western intelligence point out that Russia's move highlights the fact that Russia's ground forces have been weakened by a sloping ground offensive in Moscow and are in great distress, and that Russia is preparing to. In addition, the experts point out that Russia's move highlights the fact that Russia is preparing to deploy, sending air support to the front lines to assist with the current situation. If Ukraine does not significantly increase the number and strength of its air defense systems against Russian airstrikes, warplanes, and helicopters, in order for Ukraine to survive according to the opinions of other intelligence experts, it is inevitable that more problems similar to the ones that are currently occurring will arise. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin stated that the United States has and will continue to provide assistance to Ukraine by making use of his ability to predict what has happened and what will happen in the future. Speaking after a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group that took place at Ramstein Air Base, Austin said that Ukraine must always be ready for a major irritant and suggested that everyday defense weapon they have should be upgraded in strength. He added that we want to make sure that Ukraine has the ability to protect and support themselves in case Russia decides to bring its air force into the battlefield. The preparations for what he referred to as the spring operation are almost finished and will be finished very soon. Putin has just made his most consequential move to date, and it is now public knowledge that Russia will respond to the crisis in Ukraine with 1.5 million troops. What measures will the armed forces of Ukraine take in response to the information that has been provided? Everyone is making guesses about the actions that will be taken as well as the worst possible strategy that will be used. The most recent shifts in Russia's position are moving in a direction that is counterproductive to Ukraine's goals. It would appear that Vladimir Putin has had enough of the situation and has made the decision to concentrate all of his power on Ukraine. In an effort to bring an end to the war there, it is possible that Ukraine will once again have the upper hand over Russia as a direct consequence of Russia's move. The Ukraine immediately requested a significantly increased amount of assistance from other countries after it became aware of this information, and it did so immediately after learning. On the other hand, the consequences of this situation could turn out to be extremely severe. As things stand, Vladimir Putin has started his preparations with his most recent decisions, all of which are supported by stringent regulations. Russia has started to organize and mobilize a large number of troops in preparation for what analysts believe could be the largest war that has ever taken place anywhere in Europe. This will give 1.5 million soldiers the opportunity to recuperate and get back into fighting shape. In spite of the fact that Russia has been on the losing side of this protracted conflict in a number of different locations, the nation is currently considering going to the front lines alongside a country that it considers to be a close ally alliance with Belarus, which is located nearby and includes some of your closest friends. Russia's research findings indicating that Ukraine's resistance to any attack from the Belarusian side was very low, was a significant factor in Belarus's decision to get involved in this war. These findings were a factor in Belarus's decision to get involved in this war. After Putin became aware of this information, he still had time to make this move. It was not too late for him to do. Almost straight away, he sent 400 American air defense systems to the region that he was contemplating attacking. The S-400 seconds are accountable for some of the most well-known narratives and systems in the world. However, the president did not initially make clear the rationale behind sending these as a group of 400 seconds to Russia. This is despite the fact that the S-400 seconds are responsible for some of the most well-known narratives and systems in the world. Aside from that, there is neither a war nor a struggle taking place, and the nation that desires to become involved in this conflict is unknown. It was not made entirely clear why it was requested that Belarus received these 400 air defense systems for deployment. A significant amount of information regarding the evolution of the conflict was obtained by an Israeli intelligence agency in a very short period of time after it became available. These satellites, which were operated by the Israeli intelligence community, had a significant impact on the conflict. The Ukraine was able to see many Russian raids and attack ideas in advance, which provided it with the opportunity to take action. This was made possible thanks to the satellites, the essential preventative measures, in addition to making headway in. On the other hand, when Israel examined the most recent satellite images, it found something that it had no way of knowing would be there beforehand. It turned out that what had actually taken place was that the Russian military had started moving an unusually large number of soldiers, weapons, and ammunition toward the border with B. Israel is now aware that if this operation were to take place, it would result in an unfathomable amount of damage to Ukraine. This was previously unknown information. In spite of the fact that it does not have a particularly large amount of ammunition or military personnel, Russia has made significant progress toward the goal that has been planned for a very long. In order to bolster the strength of its armed forces and gather soldiers who are prepared for battle, Russia has recruited members of minority groups in addition to its own troops. There has been a significant rise in the number of people enlisting in the armed forces of the Russian Federation. There were almost 1 million people in total who served in the military after being recruited from members of different minority groups. The total number of Russian soldiers was less than the total number of people from these minority groups who served in the military. This was due to the large number of people who belonged to these minority groups. Putin has made it public that he intends to increase the overall number of soldiers who exactly makes up the own army in addition to the various minority groups that have been incorporated. After that, Russia arrived at the realization that despite the strengthening of its planned Operation Spring, it did not yet possess an adequate number of troops, and so it came to the conclusion that the Operation Spring would have to be delayed. Almost immediately, Russia started to massively mobilize its forces, and it did not let up. As a direct consequence of the decision to mobilize the population, it is anticipated that approximately 500,000 people will volunteer for service in the Russian armed forces. Russia, which was going through a shortage of military personnel, suddenly recruited thousands upon thousands of people to its site and eventually reached its goal of having a total of 1.5 million people working. This served as evidence that it was capable of amassing a sufficient number of soldiers for the operation that was scheduled to take place during the spring. To put it another way, every soldier who arrived after the massive mobilization would join the nearly 1 million other soldiers who were already stationed along the border with Belarus. In other words, the massive mobilization would result in the addition of nearly 1 million soldiers. It created a shock effect when it was learned what would cause the death of so many soldiers and the loss of so much power as a result of Putin's operation in Europe. When it was discovered what caused the loss of so much power, the thought of what they would also do in addition to having this much power caused the entire world to talk about it. And many more analysts made statements about the devastation they would wreak in Europe. Putin maintains his threats against each and every nation on the planet that backs Ukraine, that provides assistance to Ukraine, and that is organizing resistance to the devastation that is taking place in Ukraine, despite the fact that this plan for the destruction of the world is working when it comes to its implementation. There have been some adjustments made to the plan's original course of action. These adjustments have resulted in some differences. The fact that the United States is Ukraine's most important ally and supporter in Ukraine is a significant factor with each passing day of the conflict. Putin's anger reaches new heights as a direct result of the ongoing conflict in Russia, as well as the support that Russia gives to Ukraine. If you send these, the United States has been saying for quite some time that we will take appropriate action. Long-range missiles are on their way too. It has been announced that Patriot missiles will be shipped to Ukraine in an effort to thwart a disruption plan that could result in the outbreak of World War III, which has a high likelihood of happening. Putin was compelled to make some adjustments to the strategy for the destruction as a direct result of this announcement. One of the recent happenings is that Putin has issued an order requiring that all of Moscow's roads be equipped with anti-aircraft defense systems. This is one of the new developments. The reason for this was because it was very simple for the long-range Patriot missiles that Ukraine was given to reach even the areas of Moscow that are inhabited by people. This was the reason why this occurred. One of the many potential reasons for this phenomenon. Rachel's primary reason for experiencing such extreme dread was due to the fact that the Ukraine's performance in the war was significantly better than anyone had anticipated. For instance, we were able to see very clearly that it defied Russia with its operation on the Ko Bridge, which was something that we easily observed. This was something that we were able to see with our own eyes. To put this another way, it's possible that the fact that Ukraine was able to hit Russia much more effectively and easily after Russia's long-term destruction is the reason why Putin is experiencing such a high level of fear at the moment. As a direct consequence of these worries, Russia is carrying on with the preparations it has been making to mount a challenge to the great power that Ukraine currently possesses. The Russian government recently accomplished the launch of yet another operational military satellite. These satellites have been deployed with the intention of ensuring that Russia will continue its destruction, and that any attempt by Ukraine to carry out an operation will be met with an assault that can be predicted in advance, thereby enabling appropriate countermeasures to be taken. In addition, the deployment of these satellites is intended to guarantee that Russia will continue its destruction. It was a clear indication that Ukraine is not going to retain sole ownership of it. In addition to this, it was reported that the pro-European Union governors who had recently been installed in Moldova were in a position to provoke a significant crisis. These governors had recently been installed in Moldova. This is what the Prime Minister of Moldova has. Citation needed washer was getting ready for a cool fit that would soon take place in the country and would be caused by a group of Russian supporters. This cool fit was very close at hand as soon as it was discovered that this information was out there. Any and all activities that took place within the airspace were abruptly terminated. Putin persisted in his threat, saying that Moldova would be in the same position as Ukraine if it did not change its current behavior or stop doing what it was doing. He said that Moldova would be in the same position as Ukraine if it did not change its current behavior. One of the many factors that will contribute to the execution of Operation Spring, which are being interpreted as a form of retaliation, is the situation in Moldova. According to his point of view, the devastation and occupation that will start in Moldova will be brought about by entering through the Belarusian border. He says this will be the case. Problems with anger that are currently occurring in Europe will ensure that this is the topic of discussion and the current equilibrium will be thrown completely off. It is only possible to make out the flags of two other nations, both of which are fighting on Russia's side in this. One of them is Belarus, which will play a significant role in this major disruption that it will start and which it will destroy. By utilizing its borders, Belarus will play a destructive role in this major disruption that it will start. Belarus will play a significant role in this major upheaval that it will initiate. North Korea is the other country under consideration. It is noteworthy that Kim Jong-un appears to have adopted this policy even more recently, given that North Korea is well known for its belligerent stances. After hearing the news, every single person on the planet was taken aback of the 100,000 Korean soldiers that Russia will voluntarily send to Russia in order to fight in the Ukraine war, which is still going on despite the fact that Russia is persecuting its own people. Of the 100,000 Korean soldiers that Russia will voluntarily send to Russia in order to fight in the Ukraine war, although it might appear that Russia is the only nation contributing to the devastation of the planet, this is not actually the case. The 1.5 million soldiers that were just mentioned are drawn from a variety of different countries, some of which are listed. Those who advocate for the oblation of Russia include the Tatars, the Chechens, the Vanner, and the North Korean soldiers that we have just mentioned. This is the case, regardless of the degree to which Russia is on their side. It was asserted that if the significant problems brought about by the Chechens and Wagner continue, Russia could even end up being defeated as a direct result of them.